This is Playlist Parlay, and I'm your host, Josh Serto. Episode 10, The Essential Who, with Dan Ward. All right. Hey, everybody. I can't get his name right, but we're going to try one more time. This is Dan Ward, not going to be confused with Don Ward or Dan Anderson or any other iteration that I was going to say wrong. So Dan plays with Zero Gravity with Don Anderson and Carrie Tweedy and Lauren Kaiser. And you guys have almost got the award for having the first complete band on the show.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah, man. So welcome. Thanks for coming and doing this.
Yeah.
So you're primarily a bass player.
Primarily, yes.
Are you a singer-songwriter? Did you do other stuff too?
I've been in original bands, and I'm not really a singular songwriter. I've been in bands where we co-wrote stuff, and it's fruitful sometimes. I sing. I'm not a singer. Let's put it that right now.
I can relate.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. I can sing the right note. Doesn't sound good, but I can sing the right note, and I can blend in. That's what I do. Yeah.
Good job. Yeah, it's great. So tell me about how you broke into music as a youngster or young man. How did you get into this crazy thing?
Grew up in California, Bay Area, San Jose, when I was the age that it happened at. My dad liked Dixieland music, which I was always kind of questioning. My mom liked Broadway and classical, or, in some country stuff. But my brother and I, who's younger than me, we used to play their albums and get chopsticks and play drums, on the table and stuff when we were really small. And then in grammar school, I think fourth grade, there was a really good music program in California. And so we all had to learn song flute, to learn how music worked and whatever. And then the band teachers and the orchestra teachers brought in instruments to the classes sometimes, to demo them.
Okay.
And the turning point in my life was the orchestra teacher brought in the 4 strings and chose 4 of us to stand up and demonstrate something. He'd show us what to do. So he picked me to play bass, probably because I was tallest,
Yeah,
but
you're a tall guy.
Nonetheless, he gave me the bass to hold. I stood up and held it. He showed me to just do D, A, D, A, D, A, D, A on the A string, E string thing. And I remember thinking, I see this. I get this. I know I could see the possibility. Let's put it that way. And I started telling everybody I was a bass player, and from that point on.
So this is about 9 years old?
That would have been 9 or 10, yeah, whatever that is. Yeah, and the other part of the story that's interesting was, so I was going to play bass, but being fourth grade, all the girls were going to join the orchestra, and my friends were going to join the band, so I had to choose a band instrument, to be solidarity with the boys. So I picked trombone instead. So I played that.
Well, stayed in the bass clef at least.
Yeah, and you know what? It worked out really good because it reads the same as bass charts, same key, same notation. And trombone, I had to learn how to train my ear to play in tune. So
for intonation stuff.
Same thing as bass, pretty much. So by the time I was out of high school, I was like first year trombone and stuff, and I could play really well. Not anymore. But then when I started, I'd already been playing bass a bit, but when I started getting into fretless, it was like easy to play in tune. And I actually got a lot of work reading as a result, so I'm appreciative.
Yeah, that's we think about some instruments that have good analogs and, just they complement each other to learn as a second instrument. For me, as a drummer, my second instrument was bass. Yeah. Because I thought that I would become a better drummer if I had some fundamental knowledge and understanding as being a bass player.
Well, yeah, you're right on.
And I think the same is true as a bass player to play some drums or trombone. I think that those are really good analog instruments for you to put some reps in to just become better at your primary instrument.
Yeah, it really was. Trombone was good to get that together. And I remember I was talking to my folks about wanting a bass guitar because I wanted to play string bass, but then I saw the Beatles went like, no, I want to play bass guitar. That's way cooler, without a doubt.
Yeah.
So then I was talking about getting a bass. So they bought me a guitar, of course. So I learned how to play guitar a little bit, and then saved up, I don't know, $50 and bought my first Beatle bass from Radio Shack when I was a freshman in high school, I think.
So like a Rickenbacker knockoff kind of thing?
No, like a Hofner. Yeah, a Hofner, fake Hofner. It was like a Chinese one. And it's funny because I found one in a music store years later, and picked up and played it. It was the worst piece of I could even imagine, but it was good to start on. So
Sure.
I did that, yeah.
So mostly like public school education is what got you in. Did you end up taking private lessons or playing in church or anything like that?
No. We grew up Catholic, so no playing in church.
No playing in church.
No. And then no lessons really. I took a couple guitar lessons, but like I said, I just kind of, once I got the bass, I kind of could see how it works. So I just started listening to records and copying records. That's what I started doing. And back then I ruined all the records because we only had, record players. So
Just played them to the grooves.
they were all
out.
scratched up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing that. And in high school, though, I was really fortunate as well. When I was a senior, I had enough credits where I had a free class. And they let me take a second band class. And so I was able to just go into the band vault and just pull out all the instruments and learn how to play them. So I got to play. I ended up playing all the brass stuff, French horn and trumpet and stuff. Kind of not good, but figuring out how they work. And then bassoon for a while, which is insanely difficult.
Yeah.
Oboe is, I think I played it once and put it away because it was like, no, it's not going to happen. But yeah, I worked my way through all the band stuff, so that also was a really good perspective. You as a drummer who plays bass, I mean, you can relate to this, in a band situation. I'm not trying to be an elitist at all here, but our roles in a musical situation, my experience has been most drummers see the situation like I do, in that I'm not just listening to me, I'm listening to what the whole thing is, because I'm below the lead instruments.
We're the foundation.
Yeah, and it's weird, and what we do matters to them. If we don't do it right, they can't do their thing. So, there's that. So it's interesting. You have a kind of a more of a almost like a conductor perspective as opposed to a soloist perspective.
Yeah, I think a holistic understanding of everything that's happening. I was talking to Tyler Bates, one of the guests, and we were talking, I think it was Don actually, we were talking about in-ears, and he's like, I just love them, it's just like it does this thing. I'm like, yeah, I can't give up having one ear open. I'll use them at some shows, but I only ever put one in because I need to hear what the true stage sound is. If there's a little gremlin happening, I just don't always trust the sound guy. Or sometimes it's not audible. It's only on stage, but it might be a precursor to something else that's going to go wrong. And
it's an interesting thing. I've used in-ears a lot. I don't really like them for some of those same reasons, And I understand the clarity, but I do find it's rare that the clarity is actually there in an in-ear situation. It's usually you're compromising something somewhere to try and insist that your in-ear mix is good. Is a lot of requirement for the sound guy, is my experience. And also, I don't like in-ears in that you are separated from the audience.
I agree with that 1,000%.
You're in this
That's
weird,
my biggest
You're
issue.
in this weird vacuum with people standing there that you can't hear them. And it's like, So that's a problem for me. And also, I have one of my ear canals is narrow. So this is two things about the in-ears. First of all, when I play, I sing when I play. So, it's under my breath.
Sure.
So when I hear his in-ears, I hear myself going the whole time.
Just distract yourself.
And distract myself, yeah, I do. So it's something I'm out of tune all the time. There's that. And then, the whole thing with being separated is a real problem for me. Yeah,
I think one of the first shows I ever used in-ears on was like a jazz show. And it was really just like, just a little jazz show. It's just a little, not, it wasn't real serious. It was like a Copperopolis Park, I think is what it was. And it was just a little quiet thing in the gazebo. I'm like, well, this is a good time for me to like test run using these. And I just was like, I'm just out here practicing. I'm just in my own little world. I'm playing to a click track. It was like, even the guys playing with me just felt like I was just playing along to a track instead of performing.
It's true. I think it's a true thing, and it's also there can be pitfalls in that and Don pulls it off well with our group, but for me, it would be it's a difficult thing. And then if you're using it, you're hearing it. I like hearing the music in the air for one thing. That's for me. I grew up that way. That's how it is. I love hearing live music in a room or on a stage outdoors, just to hear it happening. I hear those sound waves hitting my ears and just all that. So I think it's difficult when you're in an isolated environment you lose that corporate thing. You lose the corporate thing of a band being on stage with maybe it's too loud, maybe it's not, but the music is actually happening there in the air, and it's happening as we do it, as opposed to separate realities.
Sure.
Which is, can be a problem, or some people seem to work through it.
Well, I think that there's two real main schools of thought about performance, even in our smaller community. There's the heavily on rails performance, which like Star Dogs like to do, where Scott, I don't know if you know Scott Martin, but Scott pre-programs a lot with MIDI tracks. There's a click track in everyone's ears. Everyone's got in-ears. And because it's so on rails, they can still interact. They just know the ride. They know all the cue points and what to do so well that they still can perform through it. And then, but that's like the extreme of that. You really got to know your material.
Yeah.
And be sort of okay that this is the same performance over and over again. And then you got the other guys, which I think I'm more in that school of, I want it to be more like an organic jam bandy kind of thing. Like there's a part and everyone should play their parts correctly. It shouldn't just be a free for all. But if it's 5 BPM too fast or too slow, that's not the end of the world. And sometimes the fact that it starts a little slow and then you get to that first strong chorus section and it gets up to tempo, and that little bit of organic stuff to me is what's interesting.
I agree, and that's my preference. And it's interesting. You're making me think of, there was a band that I was in. This would have been late 70s, early 80s, based out of Santa Cruz. I played with a lot of musicians in Santa Cruz back then, on the post-hippie kind of generation thing. There was a lot of just open jam stuff, but we were doing a band that was all original. Two songwriters were great writers. One of them had a recording studio, so we were miles ahead as far as getting our songs recorded. But they started using emulators. Remember those first came out? Mm-hmm. Great pieces of gear, great samplers. So we were doing two, and they wanted to do similar to what Scott's doing, but this is way back in the day. So that they would have, the drummer would wear headphones, and although the backing rhythm tracks were on the emulators, they would be running with the click with the drummer, which was all beautiful, except when maybe the voltage was slightly different in a club, and one of the emulators would all of a sudden play everything 4 times as fast as it should, in the middle of the song.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and these were parts that were not just incidental. Some of them were like percussion parts, they were like the thing. And so all of a sudden it was like, there's this sound like a circ. Yeah, like a circ. Yeah, no, but they were marimba parts. Melodic. Oh, no. So like, I just would start going off, right? And my friend said he ran over to the emulator at that point to try and stop it. And because of the stage lights, he looked down at the emulator, and the window where the LED window under the stage lights was gone. All it was his face reflected in the emulator. So it was really a disaster sometimes.
Yeah. It's a tough thing, like performing live, and these little gremlins come out and everything else, and but it's also kind of the fun. Some of our best stories from our careers come from these little hiccups and gremlins. No, that's very true,
and I don't mind them. I like it when things unexpected happen, because usually something good happens if people are open to it.
Yeah. When Grover and I were talking about how we ended up playing at Claimsteak Brewing in Rancho Cordova, mm-hmm. and the reason they noticed us, we were playing on the stage at not Frog Jump, it was Irish Days, Murphy's Irish Days. We were playing on the street. And there had been some power issues. Like we were running power from the hotel up to where the stage was, and people would either like turn off a light switch or something or trip over the thing and it would unplug. Yeah. So I think what happened is the PA just died. Like we just were mid-song and the PA died. Yeah. And Grover just wasn't gonna, like, this is like the third time this had happened. And he just had kind of had it. So he hops off the stage with his electric and unplugs it and just continues the song. Beautiful. Just like we just didn't drop the beat. And the guy walking was the owner of this brewery. And we've since developed a really great relationship and have been back there to play multiple times because of this little stage gremlin. And that's what made us stand out to this guy, that, hey, these guys didn't just give up. Like they had something to say, and just because the power went out, it didn't stop them from still saying it. Yeah, no, that's the right thing to do. That's the way to deal with it. I've been in situations like that too. I used to work with a singer-songwriters, a duo all around, doing bookstores and things like that. Sure. In the wintertime in the Santa Cruz Mountains, the power goes out. You light a candle and you just keep
keep going with acoustic with no mics or anything, and it's like people love it so much more,
Well, it's a more intimate kind of thing.
The real thing is always the goal, to make a real statement to somebody that you really mean, or for the environment to become intimate to the point where they are now part of it more than they were, is always a beautiful thing. I've gotten this. My wife and I went to see a Giants game one time. This is associated, believe me.
Okay.
An afternoon game for her birthday. She's a Giants fan, So we're in the stands in San Francisco at Candlestick back in the day. Kind of cloudy, a little bit rainy. The power goes out about the third inning, right? And so, of course, all the scoreboard goes down, all the sound goes off. It's just quiet. Everybody goes like, "What?" And all of a sudden you listen, and it's like you realize you're not very far from the players. You can hear them talking. You can hear everything. You can hear the balls going in the mitch. You can hear the guy's feet on the mound,
Wow.
For about 4 innings, it stayed that way. And you could feel the energy in the whole place, just like focus right down to the game.
Right, because you're getting to see behind the curtain.
Everybody was right there, man.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And then the power came back on. They all booed it so much.
It was cooler with the.
It was way better. And those are the kind of things that I look for musically, when you can get that deep or that intimate with something, a show, somebody in the audience, whatever. It's what I strive for.
Yeah, and there's so many opportunities in music for that. It starts in just learning your instrument and being as proficient as you can be and flexible as you can, and then it turns into the composition, and then it turns into the thoughts that you're thinking as you're playing it, the emotion that you put through that.
Yeah.
It's like almost like an energy thing, and then it's your relationship with the audience and your relationship with your bandmates and your stage presence and your performance and the light show and the mix. And there's so many points to make a live art have and to think, and I as a drummer I think about this stuff all the time. Like it's not about playing the right notes and the right rhythm. It's about having the right attitude and the right energy and smiling and making eye contact and not just with the audience but with my bandmates too. Everyone, we're trying to accomplish something that's like this intangible, in the moment thing, and hopefully people appreciate it.
Yep.
And I live for those moments because they happen. You just get them 2 or 3 times a year where they're just like, there it was. That's that thing that it's just elusive, but when you got it for that little second.
It's really true. It's when it happens, everybody knows, and you just try and hold on as long as you can. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that's kind of the story of how you and I got to be friends, in my opinion. Like we both played a pickup gig with Leilani at the Game Room. It was the first time I think we really met each other.
Yeah.
And we didn't really talk to each other before the show. We just kind of like plugged in and started playing. And I don't know how many songs in, but you and I both realized that the other one oh yeah, we recognized that we have a good playing chemistry. And I remember that moment. I remember thinking this guy gets it.
Well, that's exactly the same. I mean, yeah. I mean, I could tell right away. It's just one of those things. It's just you go, oh, okay, cool. It's gonna be easy. This is gonna be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. And I'm glad that we've gotten a chance to work together more since we've met each other and hang out and do stuff. And I think you're a real boon to the community just being here and offering your skills, because there's a lot more to it than just being proficient at your instrument. It's the reps, it's the understanding, it's the attitude, it's the experience, it's the humility. It's all of those pieces is what makes us really good players. And I really just appreciate knowing you and playing with you.
Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that too. You just trying to stay out of the way,
Yeah, well, that's part of our gig. And there's a leadership thing, I think, for bass players and drummers too, that when the instruments are down, oftentimes we're just trying to stay out of the way, not argue, let everyone else make decisions, and then support those decisions musically as best we can. But once the song's rolling, we're driving the bus, the bass player and the drummer.
It's true.
We assume this leadership role, because the buck kind of stops with us.
It's an interesting thing. I've done a lot of gigs over the years, and not always with like you on drums. Often it's some other person, who I've got to pick up a lot of slack for, and it's really true. I mean, as a rhythm section person, you can pick up a lot of slack if somebody is like if a drummer's not holding it together. There's where the bass player can jump in and make it still work, even though the drummer's not there. And it's just one of those things where knowing when you have to do that and when you don't, is kind of the balancing act.
Yeah. And I think this line of thinking dovetails really well into The Who, which is, I think that John Entwistle might be the best of the rock and roll bass players. And I'm saying that being fully aware that John Paul Jones and Geddy Lee are actually real people too.
It's true.
But I think that John Entwistle understood what we were just talking about, because Keith Moon is either one of the most genius drummers or one of the most awful drummers, depending on your point of view, because he certainly wasn't holding it down in the traditional sense.
No, it's true. And I think the answer to that question, which one was he? The answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's both, because obviously his technique was insane. The way he would hit the drums was different than anybody for the most part. I remember seeing pictures of him holding the drumsticks like a pointer, like he's he's got in the palm of his hand with his index finger up the stick, like he's pointing at a or a pencil almost or something.
Yeah, not the best
traditional
technique in the world.
No, but nonetheless, and I often wonder, because I've heard the story of how he got the band. The guy in the band, he walked up to him and said, "Your drummer's terrible. I can do better." And they said, "Okay, show us." And he got up and destroyed everything. I kind of wonder if he even played before that point in time. If he just said, "I'm going to do that."
I don't know. I mean,
because it was so unorthodox, so different.
Yeah, it was very unorthodox, to the point that I don't know that there's a lot of other people who tried to really copy that Keith Moon style. We were talking a little bit before we started rolling about how, I think Mitch Mitchell might be the closest contemporary of this really aggressive, Tom's forward, 60s, 70s, player. But, other guys, I think, apply that heavy Tom stuff and all crash cymbal, just loud and bombastic, but not the same way Keith Moon did it. He was just wild, man.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, if I was a drummer and I was wanting to learn Keith Moon drum parts, I think I would be pretty intimidated pretty quickly. Not that I couldn't necessarily do them, but it seemed like there wasn't sections you could learn the first section and then save it for when it comes around again, because it's not going to come around again, probably. At least not the same way. It's going to be different,
Yeah, even for me, knowing drums the way I do, he's a hard drummer to talk about because it's just kind of wild, maybe tribal, kind of feral. Mm-hmm. He had a very feral drumming style. Mm-hmm. And it worked. Clearly, The Who was one of the biggest bands in the world for a lot of years.
Yeah.
But again, was he his own worst enemy, or did he just make John Entwistle sound like the best rock bass player of all time? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, John also had an interesting take on it too. Obviously, I think, like you're saying, it was built out of expediency. He had to cover. He had to take care of it like it was. But once again, then you'd ask, well, why did they keep Keith? Then if it made John's job harder, I'm guessing John thought, well, cool, now I can do what I want to, or maybe I can fill it up more. But I think it was also one of those things where when that person got up on stage, all of a sudden the thing happened,
Right.
And all these dudes were smart to figure oh, okay, so we should let this go, because sometimes you don't have the, you've been in bands like I have where one of the persons in the band you just don't really like that much, but it all works. And I don't want to change it,
Yeah, I mean, the chemistry was there.
Yeah.
The record sales prove it. This is music that totally holds up.
Yep.
It's not... There's a couple of them, I think, for production quality. Some of those early recordings that you can hear, there's production quality differences. You can tell they're older. But you look at the later 70s stuff, mid to late 70s recordings, I think they sound every bit as good as music being produced today.
They do. I know that they, as far as producers go, I know they had Glyn Johns recording them.
Right.
Who was one of the big guys in England, for that stuff. And he really had a great angle on The Who. I thought he made the drums sound great in The Who. He made them obviously sound acoustic, but they were never buried. They were always there. They had a certain liveness, even on their studio recordings to the recordings. Great sounding records, John's bass tone was great. From a bass player perspective, before the 70s, he was using all kinds of different basses. He was playing Ricks. He was playing Dan Armstrong Longhorns. He was playing P basses, whatever, But then I think the time period you're talking about, the like early 70s to late 70s, he actually was using Gibson pickups for a lot.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And if you think about it, how Gibson basses are darker, but what he did is he would put Fender necks on them, so it would have a P bass neck, but with a Thunderbird pickups. So they would have some punch from the whole maple neck thing, but they would have that really dark, rich Thunderbird bass thickness. So it was an interesting combination of brightness and dark at the same time.
Yeah, I was reading, I think maybe just the Wikipedia article on The Who was talking about he had just lots of Frankenstein basses where he would sort of disassemble all the parts and put together one he thought, but then he'd just take all the extra parts and just slap a different one together to see what he would get.
Yeah, I think he actually, when he was a kid, he made his first bass. He actually just made it, because he wanted to play bass. He made one, which is a pretty interesting, attitude.
Yeah.
But they probably weren't a lot of them around then, too. But he had a guy a luthier who he would use. And when he started doing the Fender Gibson thing, that was unusual because Fender's set neck stuff,
Right.
And so they would have to, undo the set neck, take the Gibson neck off and put the Fender neck on, which is bolted. So that's an interesting kind of thing. So it wasn't just slapping together. It took some real work.
Sure.
I heard that he really wanted to do that because at first he was playing P basses live a lot, especially when they're coming to America at the beginning in the late 60s, early 70s. But he found them, and P basses, I love P bass. I play P bass all the time. But we're talking back in the day when they were using, first of all, they're before modern PAs. So the amps that were all up on stage were actually turned on. They were all really being used, as opposed to now where they're just props. They're using like something direct in the back room, No, they were really on. And with bass, when you get 8, Sun amps or 8 high watt amps and crank them up, you lose a lot of low end. You get a lot of high, especially with the P bass. You're going to get spank, and which is awesome. It's really compelling. But for him, he wanted more low end, which is why he started using Gibsons, for the lower, the humbucking pickups, because they would hold up a lot of the low end still and get all the edge on top, so it's interesting. But yeah, so he learned a lot, and.
Well, and I think he was trying to fill out for the live sound just a bigger sonic range of the low end because for all intents and purposes, The Who is a trio.
It's a trio.
They're just with a lead singer, but musically just the trio. Generally.
Yeah.
And there's piano stuff, and they had different people on tour sometimes, but the core is...
Well, it's especially when they were live back then. At that point in time, they were when this was all happening. Late '60s, early '70s, when he was really developing his whole thing. It stayed from that point forward. Because before then, the songs were really more like one-offs. A lot of the early Who stuff was, and he would do the correct thing sometimes, in the verse, and it was perfect to do it. It wouldn't be as flamboyant as later on, but they were developing that, and I often think of The Who really as 3 soloists with a singer in front. It's kind of how it felt like lots of times, where the song was what it was. They all knew what it was, but they weren't constrained by the album arrangement at all.
Right.
It was going to be different most of the time. Sometimes great, often terrible,
But that's, one of the things that I've learned, just the themes I'm talking with all my guests about these first 10 bands, and these first 10 bands have all been pretty noteworthy bands. There hasn't really been something that's super obscure. Poco's probably the most obscure, but
yeah.
I found, I was a little bit humbled when I said, hey, Fred decided to do this band that I had never heard of. And any of you, and it's like the engagement I've got from that post is Poco apparently was a much bigger band than I knew about, and I just didn't get exposed to them as a young guy, I guess.
Yeah, they were big.
But anyway, my point is that it's innovation. Mm-hmm. All these bands, when you really break it down, you start talking about the nuts and bolts of what some of these guys or gals were doing. It's innovation. They built on the ideas of what they were listening to before, and they put something new and different on top, and they added their own thing. They're not just re-emulating this thing from before and like, oh, here's my take on that. It's my take on that with innovation. Yeah. And innovation can be technological, like, with the Frankensteining the basses, or, Queen taking the amps on like a rope and literally swinging them past the Leslie. I mean, they were doing all kinds of wild stuff just to get innovative sound.
Yep.
And so the lesson I think I've learned in these first 10 episodes is that, if we want to do something different, we can't, you want to get noticed as a band. You have to innovate. You have to be doing something new that nobody's heard before that sounds good. And oftentimes innovation is, 90% that wasn't so great, but 10% of it, you just got to recognize that 10%, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so, and then just keep moving forward is really what it's about. I mean, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff, and sometimes they work great, I remember I did a recording with a friend of mine. We had a project going, and we wanted a sound we couldn't make a synth do. And we got the sound finally he brought in some vacuum cleaner hoses and poked holes in them, and I spun them around his head, around an array of microphones.
Yeah. I mean...
And it was the perfect sound.
Innovation, man. So tell me about when you finally came to Tuolumne County. I know that you played with Stompbox, and we met doing like a Leilani gig, and now you're with Zero Gravity. Tell me about your timeline here.
Just in Tuolumne County?
Well, you can go back as far as you like.
I'll go back a little bit. When I was in San Jose in the late 80s, I was in a trio original band with a guy named Alex Cash. You know Alex Cash? Alex Kashavarov. He's a local guy. And so that band broke up, and then I ended up coming to Tuolumne County, and we had just come here. We were living in Copperopolis at the time, and picked up the local paper with Second Saturday Night. And lo and behold, there's Alex playing at the shoe store on Second Saturday Night, So I went down and showed up, and he's a great songwriter, great singer, great guitar player. There's an acoustic thing solo at that point. And so I walked into the store. It'd been a long time. We hadn't seen each other for 20 years or more.
Wow.
Yeah. So I walk in with my wife, and we walk in. He's there playing, and he's looking around, playing, looks at me, but just kind of moves away, just moves on, keeps looking. I'm thinking, man, it must have been too long. It doesn't recognize me. So he stops that tune and then plays Daniel, and looks right at me, So it's like, okay, Alex is still here. Yeah. So anyway, we talked, and then he was doing a thing at the nursery that is now Inner Sanctum in Columbia.
Right. In Columbia.
Yeah. He was doing the fourth Sunday of every month, doing a show there at the nursery.
Oh, nice.
So I just started playing with him, and he would use, I forget the guy's name, the drummer, Bob.
Bob Lehman?
Jaws guy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was playing drums, and Gordon Gee would be playing sax. Occasionally Jim Anderson would sit in on drums.
Okay.
Ridge sat in on drums one time. I met Ridge there.
Nice.
Yeah, and did that for a while, and then that just kind of, he moved away, and then I just happened to, where I live, I met Lauren, and we started talking, and I forget how, somehow he found out that I played, and he said, yeah, I'm thinking about putting this band together. There's this girl, her name's Carrie, I think, and I'm thinking about putting her together, this thing. Would you be into it? And I said, sure. Because I didn't really plan on playing much when I moved here. I moved here from another place where I'd been doing a lot of music, and we just moved back to California from somewhere else, just really with nothing. No job, no house. We just moved here. Yeah, it was interesting. So I didn't anticipate, having much to do. But then I went and went to the audition at Lauren's Garage, and they were all real nice, but I heard Carrie sing, and I thought, oh, okay.
Yeah, this is worth doing.
I'll stay here.
Yeah, she's not bad.
And, and also Lauren, Lauren was, Lauren's a great drummer. He was, but Lauren's really together as far as what his vision and all that stuff is. I thought, okay, well, this guy's going to be able to drive a band, and I feel solidarity here. And she sings great. So that's vote 1 and 2. I'll stick around. And then, the Stompbox happened and became what it was. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And then that band kind of morphed into Zero Gravity, because it's still you and Lauren and Carrie.
It is. And, the thing with bands, they kind of have lifespans often, and I think we kept that going for 5 years. But I think the whole COVID thing kind of made it difficult to keep it all going. And then we did another year after COVID. But sometimes, like B.B. King said, when the thrill is gone, right?
Sure.
It just is, And so we took some time off, and then Lauren started talking about doing something else, and I thought, yeah, let's we're all just sitting around thinking, what do you want to do? So we said, well, let's do something obviously along the same lines, but a different song list, different kind of concept, more variety. Stompbox was pretty focused with a particular kind of, 80s, late 70s, 80s hard rock thing. But there's, that seems to be supplied by a lot of other bands in the neighborhood too.
Sure.
So we figured, let's try something different.
Yeah, right on. And yeah, I think that the number of working bands on this side of the river in Tuolumne County is pretty healthy right now.
Yeah.
I think we're in a place where there's enough venues and enough dollars flowing that, it supports a pretty good number of bands that stay together and can, put records out and get gigs and stay relevant. And sometimes that's hard in this community. Sometimes the economy kind of makes it so that the venues aren't going to pay enough, and then nobody wants to take the time to stay in the band because it's just, people think that bands make a bunch of money, and really we're just trying to cancel out losses for gear and time. When a band charges, it's, those guys are never getting ahead. I'm never getting ahead. If somebody is, I don't know how they're affording it, but I mean, if you really just broke it down for gear, rehearsal time, replacement gear from wear and tear or stuff growing legs and occasionally walking away at shows and things like that. And then just travel time, just your hourly wage. You got a gig that's 2 hours away and it takes an hour and a half to get set up. And, that turns into a 12, 14-hour day really quick.
Factor that into an hourly wage. Yeah, it goes down.
Yeah.
Pretty fast.
But, I'm glad that between us and Calaveras County that the music scene's pretty healthy. There seems to be a lot of bands that are working, a lot of good bands that are working. And the venues generally support it enough that they all stay healthy and stay making good music. And that makes me happy to see right now.
It's a good thing. Yeah, I was actually surprised. I didn't realize it was as together as it was when I came here. It's good. I really like it. Yeah,
I think from a music point of view, it's actually kind of the healthiest it's been in a very long time. It's offset by the crazy inflation from other political stuff. I don't want to get into any of that. Just cost of living and things in California makes other challenges. But just the number of venues that are putting money out to have good entertainment right now seems really healthy. And I'm glad. And I'd like to get some venue owners or people that are booking to come on this show, because I'd like the non-musician side of it too. I think that they'd be a valuable guest to. Yeah, that would be interesting to hear. I would like to hear that and just hear what their take on it is. Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, man. Cool. So I think we're pretty much covered with what you had going on and the backstory of Dan Ward. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to dig into The Who with our playlist. Sure. All right, take a break. All right, and we're back. So we're doing The Who. We each picked 10 songs. This is probably the most crossovers I've ever had on the show. We have 4 crossovers for The Who, which I think is really interesting, because I think the 6 that aren't crossovers, I kind of went more with the hits, like the stuff I heard on the radio, and yours seem like maybe a little bit deeper cuts. Yeah, I think some are. Yeah. A lot of the ones that I picked just were things that really had meaning for me when I was discovering the albums. Right on. All right, so let's dive in. I've got my number 10 as Magic Bus, and right away, this is the first crossover. But you've got it significantly higher on your list, and I think I'd rather talk about the details of Magic Bus when we get it in, higher on the list. Sure. For you. So Magic Bus for me was number 10. Your number 10 is I Can't Explain. Yeah. So tell me about that. Cut. Well, yeah, I Can't Explain. I think this is early for them. I think it's 1964. Okay. I think Pete wrote it when he was 18. Wow. So the song, I think he wrote it because his manager said, we have to have a hit song. And he had never written one, so he figured, okay. But I think what it's really about, it's about an 18-year-old, as it were, who can't explain to his girlfriend how he feels about her. And I think Pete was talking about it because he was
too high all the time.
Yeah.
But for me, what I like about it is it's just such a clear, singular thing. It has all the elements of the Who that I find attractive. It's kind of like it's almost like it's the blueprint to set up the rest of the career from my ears anyway. It starts off with just the Pete Townsend chord thing, which is just 5-4-1, it's standard 3 chords, but the voicing it's different. It's kind of like it's voiced so that it's like a 5 chord or 4 chord, and the one goes higher. It's got a higher voicing, and the bass goes down, so it's got contrary motion, which is interesting straight off the bat. It's just a cool tune. For me, it's everything that a '60s pop tune should be, with a lot of. It kind of hints at the energy of the Who to come later in the later years.
Sure.
Vocals are great. Background vocals are great. An interesting trivia thing about this is Jimmy Page was on this session.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they didn't use his tracks.
Oh.
Yeah, because Jimmy said, I was on the session playing rhythm guitar, but in the end, Pete's tracks were killer. They just went with those. So yeah.
It's interesting. Like the Who's an interesting band to me because they were all so young when they started the band and the career. It's like these guys were all like, I think Pete was only 17 when they really got the deal.
Yeah.
And Roger's only a year older than him. I don't know relatively how old John and Keith were.
I think John and Pete were pretty much the same. I think Keith was younger.
So that explains sort of the rock star lifestyle these guys got, because these guys never got to be adults.
Yeah.
They just kind of were kids, probably living at home, and then... 17, 18, they're doing it, and then they become one of the, if not the biggest band in the world. They
really were, yeah. And I think from what I've read about it, I think Pete, for sure, and maybe John to a certain extent, were more in England. They were more kind of middle class, we'll call it. I'm not sure how the descriptions of the society aren't the same as here. So they weren't rich, but they were more like. Private schoolish in a way.
Sure.
They weren't, they're
had a little bit more financial support behind them.
I think so. Yeah, I think Roger was basically a geezer, a guy who would have been working on the docks if he wasn't in the band, like that. I think he was a sheet metal worker actually.
Okay.
When the Who started, and as far as I can tell, no one knows what Keith was doing.
Yeah. I mean, for the whole thing.
Pretty mysterious overall.
Cool. Yeah, it's a good cut, and I think because it's such an early cut, it really just kind of makes me think about, because I think that Keith, I didn't look it up recently, I think he got to only 34 when he passed away. And, for a body, you'd think like, well, 34-year-old, how much of a body of work can he have? But there's a huge body of work from him as a drummer for only being 34 when he passed. But he started when he was like 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like he was just gigging. I mean, he was in one of the biggest rock bands ever to exist.
Yeah. It seems to me that, like you're right about that. It seems to me once they started doing it, they just were doing that. And it wasn't like they were working up to it. They just, they were doing it.
It just happened.
Yeah. So that's interesting, different times.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know that, it would take lightning in a bottle for it to happen again. It's
just really a compelling tune for me. I really like it. It's got a lot of the elements I love. Also, too, I know that it was at that time in England there was trouble on the radio was not very forthcoming to pop music, and there was this famous story about there was a pirate ship. They call it. There was like a radio ship off of the coast of England that was out there. They would play stuff that the BBC wouldn't let on the air. And Can't Explain was one of the tunes they played. They were pirating it into England. That's what was happening.
Wow.
A lot of bands got broke that way back then because the BBC was pretty tight about what they would let out.
I didn't know that like pirate radio was literally.
It's real. Yeah.
Huh. I mean, I've heard the term. I just never thought that it was literally a boat.
Yeah, they were far enough off the coast. They were international waters, so they could do it. And I think they got raided from time to time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild. I mean, it just shows how much more, I mean, more might be the wrong word, but how influential music was in the 50s to the 70s.
Yep.
And then in the 80s, it got kind of started the commercialization process. And then the 90s kind of had the grunge thing where it sort of came back to having a little bit more social meaning. I mean, I felt like the Nirvana, Primus, Dave Matthews Band, Stone Temple Pilots, for me during high school, I felt like, oh, this is like a little bit like how the 60s seemed to me being the age that I am.
Yeah.
And then by 2000, it was just done.
Just over again, I know.
And it just doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like it's come back.
Yeah, that's a whole different topic of discussion, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's I think it's the lack of record stores and streaming and it used to be that you'd go on tour to promote your album because that's where the money was the recording.
Yeah.
And now it's like you make an album to support the tour.
It seemed that way also too. It seemed like back in this time period, you would put tunes out, but you had to actually do it. You had to play it, you had to really sing, you had to make it up. And with the pirate radio thing being what it was sometimes often difficult to get your stuff heard. Whereas with the beautiful internet we have now, which is convenient for a lot of things, I think things that are put out on the internet sometimes now get their own legitimacy just because they're there without any real artistic value. The fact that they're there counts for as much as it being a good song or not.
Yeah, but then there's also just a ton to sift through because anybody can put anything up, and I think that's part of the reason that it's not as meaningful is there's just, a ton of material. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but there's just so much. I'd be interested to know how many gigabytes of new material ends up on Spotify daily.
I don't know.
I mean, I bet it's a lot. I bet it's terabytes. It would seem to be info.
It would have to be huge.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just an interesting thought.
Yeah.
My number 9 is The Kids Are All Right. I think this is a pretty early one too. It sounds like it from the production quality.
Yep.
First album?
I don't know. See, that's for me. I'm not sure because the Who albums were interesting. The first few albums they seemed almost like compilations at the beginning. Because I'm not sure which album this is on. Yeah, but it's early. It's for sure. It might only have been a single.
Yeah, and to me, this kind of sounds like they understood that the Beatles were big. And we're trying to do something similar. So there's a lot of Beatle-esque kind of vibes in this particular cut. While not being a copy, but certainly the influence feels there. And like I said, between the production quality, it sounds a little bit older, and then the style. I thought this was interesting and became essential just because I think it's a good tune.
It is, yeah.
But I think that there's a history with this particular cut that kind of, you get to the early 70s stuff and these guys were cutting edge for technology. Well, they had all the money behind them too. Yeah,
they did, but you're right. I mean, to me, it's they were still figuring it out. Even though, like I mentioned, Can't Explain, I think it's perfect for what they did, but it still was the beginning. The beginning steps. And The Kids Are All Right is the same way. It does have Beatle flavor. A lot of bands did it with the way they made the vocals, the shape of the vocals, and just the guitar sounds. Interesting in both these tunes. One thing that I noticed about Pete Townshend's soloing, which really wasn't soloing, it was like guitar part sections.
Right.
I really hear a lot of Scotty Moore with Elvis's influence. The whole
that chicken picking,
the whole, but also the chordal thing for the solos, where it wouldn't be a linear solo. It would be like almost like a jazz chord thing, like a Wes Montgomery thing, almost.
Sure.
And I really hear that in Pete's development from that influence. Which is interesting. He never really was a super long line soloist. He did a lot of just sonic sheets of sound and stuff, is what a lot of his stuff was. And I think it comes from there, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Your number 9, I'm going to introduce it because I have an interesting connection to this. I don't know if we're just talking off mic or on mic, but one of the guys who helped me cut my teeth here in town in Sonora when I first started playing was Billy Cook, who was a really fantastic jazz piano guy. And when I was 17, he was sneaking me into the 21 club saying I was 21 when I wasn't, just so I could gig. Yeah. And so I played a ton of gigs with this guy when I was 17 on, and he showed me everything. And his hero was Mose Allison. And Mose wrote Young Man Blues. Yeah. And that's when I heard this from your list, I was like, well, I wonder who wrote it. I didn't know if Mose was covering The Who or The Who was covering Mose. So I researched it. This is actually a Mose Allison tune. that these guys covered. So I just wanted to set that up for you.
Yeah, and the Moe's tune is distinctly different. Obviously, it's just solo piano with him, doing this tune has, start to stops, vocal phrase, then instrumental answer, back and forth. That's how the whole Mose Allison tune is he does this statement that he does, and the guitar, the band arrangement is taken directly during the vocal parts from the Mose phrasing. It's not the same, obviously, but it is the same. It's the same song.
Idea.
Yeah, this is from an album. I like it's from Live at Leeds, which I think is my favorite Who album of all. And it's a fun song. It's cool, but then like they do when they were at this point in time in their career live, they would take it into an extended solo section, band solo section in a way. Really exciting, really cool, interesting turns. There's one thing that happens in this tune that's great is at the end of the guitar solo where Pete just does these triads. It just goes chromatically up from where he starts, and just it's like this. It's a really visual musical move. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And then it breaks down to some really delicate stuff, and then back into the madness.
Yeah, and I mean, and at the root of it all, this is not a rock tune. This is a jazz blues tune.
Yep.
And I think I'd be hard pressed to find anyone left alive that would want to discuss Mose Allison in detail on this particular podcast. So right here's my plea. Go listen to some Mose Allison.
Yeah.
If you're out there and have any inkling of listening to jazz piano, but not like classical pretty jazz piano, like dirty, grungy, the piano smells like a beer jazz piano, and listen to some Mose Allison. He's fantastic. He wrote some of the most witty little wry comedy tunes.
Yep.
He's a genius. He's a genius writer and a genius player. And this might be my only opportunity to tell everyone that Mose Allison is someone to put ears on.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else for Young Man Blues for that?
You know what? It's just, once again, it's off that album. If anybody has ever checked out the album, we'll talk about it a little later too, but that Live at Leeds, to me, if you want to know what The Who was about, that's the one to pick, because it's just, it's them at their height.
1970. August of 70, I think is when that was.
We're talking 1970. We talked about this earlier. The PA was probably a small PA, just guitar and bass amps turned up to as loud as they'll possibly go. And it's just completely thrilling the whole way through. An interesting thing about this album, too, I'm not sure if you know this about this album. As a young, aspiring bass player, this was a great album to cut my teeth on, because thankfully the way this album works is the guitar is all right ear and the bass is all left ear.
So you just pan it and drop the bass
drums
out.
and vocals in the middle, and so you learn, and then you should turn the bass off and play with the guitar. So as a 15-year-old to be able to play with the Who was pretty screaming hot.
Yeah, that's really cool.
That's right.
I wonder if the remastered version is still...
I think it is. I think it's left, right, yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if like younger people even understand what we're talking about for stereo stuff.
Yeah, they can figure it out later.
Yeah. I don't even know, like on like modern technology, if you can even pan like that anymore.
I wonder.
I think my tuner that I've got inside, but that's a pretty expensive tuner I've got in my...
That's a good point. Yeah, I wonder. That's probably not
kids
there.
are listening on iPhones and stuff. I don't even know that you have the ability to do a pan.
Probably not. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, even if they understand what we're talking about, I don't know if they have the ability to do it on modern technology.
Very mysterious all of a sudden.
Yeah. All right. So that puts us at my number 8, which is another crossover. Love Reign O'er Me. You've got it much higher. So again, I think I'd rather talk about it at your position than mine.
Sure.
Just because you've got it significantly higher on your list than I do. Which then puts us at your number 8, which is also a crossover, but they're much closer. So we'll talk about it now, which is I Can See for Miles.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is also, for me, this is I'm going to call it the first batch of the Who career, still pre-Tommy era. I find it an interesting tune because it's once again, one of the real typical Pete Townsend devices where the bass line for most of the song is just a pedal point, and the chords happen on top of it. A lot of interesting. It has a great vocal arrangement, you know, and I Can See for Miles and Miles and Miles does these chromatic changes, you know, that are 3-part at least, you know, that are pretty compelling. And also, I think this is in my ears, this is the most compressed guitar track ever recorded. It's pretty amazing, you know, because I mean, I know that they were experimenting with compression, but to the point where like you hit the chord and it just the compression just pulls the rest of the sound up past the initial attack and just makes these swells and stuff. So it creates this really interesting soundscape.
Palette, yeah.
Yeah, and the song, and it's like it's this all-encompassing kind of like never-ending kind of thing. And the vocals are about, you know, speaking to a girl saying, you know, I know what you're doing. I can see for miles and miles and miles. You can't fool me. So basically, it's a pretty intimidating thing, you know. So I just have always found it compelling.
Yeah, and then like from a historical sound, this is my number 7, so they're back to back in the list. I also felt like this is like the shedding of the snake skin of the Beatles. Like this is like we understand where we came from. We're trying to kind of follow in these footsteps, but we're not the same thing. Yeah. And you know, I think in a certain world, maybe you could convince someone this is like a deep Beatles cut if they didn't know any better. But I think this is like the time when the Who are really coming into their own sound. And it's not the same. This is a very distinct sound, but still has the last little vestiges of that established Beatle sound. Yeah,
it does. You know, I think you're right with that, because this probably is the first one of the new thing, is what it seems like, you know. Yeah. And it's interesting, too, with the Who compared to the Beatles, just as you mentioned that. You know, I was thinking about the Beatles the other day. Don't want to get off on this tangent much, but they were so different than the rest of the bands. They really, I think, were more like a 50s songwriter kind of band, where they were about the individual songs rather than the band identity, you know, in terms of
that's fair, yeah.
You know, and then when the Who, they were doing that too at first, you know, because I know the first albums were pretty uneven as far as, I mean, there's tunes about all kinds of crazy stuff, you know.
Right.
And then after this point, they pretty much started going in the direction that everybody knows as being the Who, the big, huge, bombastic thing, you know. That's what I see this as too.
I think they had really, really quick growth. Mm-hmm. As a band. I think that, you know, some of the other bands that we've talked about, like, you know, I think Rush like sat in their pocket for a long time, and they kind of got a little poppy, then they kind of got back to their signature thing, and it's like kind of like they found their space and existed in it. And I felt the Who rather just felt like they were on this crescendo the whole run. Mm-hmm. Like they started out and it just kept getting bigger. Every new iteration, every new album, every new live performance. And part of that's probably lifestyle stuff. These guys were burning from both ends in every sense, with women, with alcohol, with drug use, with music, and like every kind of stimulant, good and bad. These guys were just...
Yeah, I also think it was a different time, and since it was England too, England's not very big, you know. So they would. I know that all these bands and these guys, especially, they would, you know, they were from London, but they would do a gig in Birmingham, then drive back, and then go to the studio that night and go right to work. So they were just working all the time.
Yeah,
yeah.
And I think it shows. I mean, you know, we talked about this a little bit off, but when I think of like the rock band, like the rock and roll band, you know, it's not the Beatles that I think of. I think of, for me personally, it's the Who and or Steppenwolf are the two bands for me that are just like, these are the rock and roll bands. Like that's what rock and roll is to me. And everything else is, you know, like the Beatles are a precursor. They influenced this. Yeah. And then you get to like Zeppelin later, or you know, Springsteen later or something else. Mm-hmm. But like there's just this one thing that for me is what rock and roll is, and the Who and Steppenwolf are kind of the two that just fill what that means to me. Yeah,
I would agree with that. It was a big deal. They were I think I mentioned to you earlier, you know, I'd just go back to this story that we were talking, that I watched this woman who was viewing a video of the Who from previous years, a young person who had never seen them ever, and she was watching it and she was into it, and it was about halfway through she said, "Oh my gosh, these are rock stars, right?
Yeah,
I heard about these. I heard about this." I'm thinking, really, wow, it's amazing that they just heard about it. Yeah, but yeah, that's who they were.
Yeah, and through, you know, rock star lifestyle. You know, I kind of was joking. I don't mean to make light of it, but I think that John Entwistle had the most rock star death of anybody.
Yeah,
you know, and I mean that in a positive way. You know, I mean, he kind of, you know, he got to 57, which is young, especially as I get older. At 57 seems like it's a pretty scary number to pass away at. But at the same time, he'd done this huge body of work. His entire life was sort of without rules. And I think he had a lot of behaviors and addictions and things that you know, challenged him. But, you know, he went out before a show in Vegas with a stripper.
Yep.
You know, and on the one hand, that seems maybe a little cliche or whatever, but at the other hand, it's like that's how that dude operated.
That is, yes. That was, and you know, that was, he was in the place doing what he loved to do the best. That way, I mean, you know, so, hey.
and you know, was the lifestyle necessary for the product? It kind of is the point I want to make.
That's interesting. That's an interesting question. Yeah, which leads which? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm kind of a proponent of the idea that the lifestyle does lead it, which is why I don't think it's sad that he went out like that. I think it's just like, yeah, he lived his whole life as a rock star.
Yep.
Even when he was broke, even when he couldn't afford living like a rock star, he still did it.
That's right.
Or tried to do it as best he could. And to me, that whole lifestyle, it's like, yeah, he never settled down, even as he got, you know, knocking on 60's door. You know, he really lived it that way.
Yeah.
And I think Townsend kind of calmed down, and Roger, I don't know a lot about Roger, but it seems like he ended up calming down, or maybe was never quite as wild as the rest of them anyway. But
yeah, that's what I hear. Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, I mean, you know, and John also, you know, he did do his own things too. He did his own solo albums.
Yeah.
And he would put a band together that he would tour the world with, you know, because he just didn't want to stop doing that thing. And I understand it. If I could do it, I would keep doing it too.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody, you know, I don't necessarily want the rock star lifestyle with the cocaine and the strippers, but if somebody would just give me the money for I could just play drums every day, like that was my job. I get to play drums. Man, I'd love life if that was the situation.
Well, also too, as a musician, you know, a rock musician, especially if you know, get the taste of playing on a stage in front of 20, 30,000 people, it's a pretty big deal. And it's a really, it's something you want to do again.
Yeah. Well, it's a big psychological high to just feel that loved by that many people and worshipped or revered or whatever.
Well, and all of it, just from a musician standpoint too, to be on a stage that's that large, to be playing the music at that level of volume and intensity and putting it out there is really a satisfying thing to do.
Sure.
You know,
that makes sense too.
It's, you don't want to not do it anymore.
Yeah. Why would I not want to do this anymore?
Exactly.
All right. So with all that philosophy, we're at your number 7, which is Bargain.
Oh, yeah. Bargain from Who's Next? It's 1971. This is, a lot of people argue that that's the best Who album. It's got a lot of great songs on it.
It does have a lot
and
of
it
good
also,
cuts.
I think, is the first one. Live at Leeds I love, but I think what you're talking about is when the Who became who they are. I think Who's Next was the album that defined that sound, you know, that rock star sound. That was the album with all of those tunes that are on the radio and on the TV shows and all that stuff, you know, still to this day. Bargain's an interesting tune. You know, Who's Next was Pete had a different concept. There was this concept he had called Lifehouse, which he used for years. And he actually, many of the Who tunes over different parts of the career were really from this concept that he had. And it was an interesting concept. It was really kind of, it was a concept for, once again, a rock opera, like Tommy was a rock opera. Frankly, I always felt they were more like Broadway, but, you know, they weren't really operas. But, you know, not to their detriment, you know. This one was really kind of like, he was on a kind of a concept that, like, not unlike The Matrix, where it was about the future being a place where humans were ruled by tight government, everything was test tube driven, you know, and the Lifehouse part of it was somebody got the idea that through music, they could, and computers, they could like have everybody in a venue being influencing the apparatus that made the music to develop the one pure note for humanity was what his whole thing was. And it was kind of like a salvation thing for humanity, or a reset, you know.
Okay.
Anyway, he never could really pull that off, as you can imagine, because and I think it kept developing over the years. But many of the tunes off of this album were from that whole concept.
Okay.
And Bargain is one of the ones. It's one of my favorites. A lot of really cool things about just the sound of it. You know, the acoustic guitars sound awesome. That just the way they're layered. It's just.
Is this someone where he's got like a 12-string? He's playing a 12-string on the intro.
I think it's. I'm not even sure. It might be a couple of sixes, but yeah, that's that sound. That really, you know, really rich, but not spiky. Just really rich guitar sound that just is so compelling. Got the cool synth line doing the melody.
Right.
Great drum track.
Yeah, this is the first one where well, not the first one because we skipped a couple over, but yeah. Keith Moon's just going nuts on this one.
This one to me is I love this track. It makes me laugh whenever I hear it because once again, this is like, I think it might hold the record for the most crash cymbal hits of any tune in the rock and world. You know, and there's also, it even goes to the point where there's one point towards the end where there's a pause, you know, and there's nothing there. He just goes like crash, right?
Yeah,
just one crash.
There has to be something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's beautiful, you know. And once again, on this album, on Who's Next, the interplay between the guitar parts and bass parts, I thought were especially interesting because Entwistle was being really free, like we talked about how he plays. He was really a free player, yet he always had it rooted in. It was always grounded at the same time, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best guys for using the same note in 3 octaves for a whole verse and making it good every time. It's like the variation was beautiful.
Yeah, I think that the genius of Entwistle's playing really is a lot on this cut to get a lot of why he was so important to the Who in particular, but really to just rock and roll bass playing. Because he was in a band with a drummer that almost had no pocket. And pocket's a real esoteric thing. It's hard to describe, but you know, it's what everything else fits into. And drummers are often sort of tasked with this idea that we're creating a pocket where everything else fits, you know? And Keith Moon was not a pocket drummer.
That's true.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that this is one of those tunes, though, where the bridge on this tune, towards the end, is actually a bridge section. It's kind of like towards the end. Pete sings this part. There's actually a hi-hat just going steady through it.
Yeah, I did notice that.
And what's funny, it occurs to me, I wonder if somebody else played that after the fact, because Keith wouldn't do it, you know, I wonder.
Yeah, so when I was doing the research, Keith Moon had a disdain for the hi-hat instrument of a drum kit. And part of it was he didn't think it was loud enough or couldn't be heard. He just played everything else so loud. He was basically, bass drum, snare drum, lots of toms and crash cymbals. He didn't like those pingy cymbals. He just wanted to have this whirling dervish of a drum part.
Well, you know, it was like the rock and roll everything all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
But to be a bass player, I mean, when there's only, Pete who's doing the keys and the synths and the guitars and doing background vocals, like he's a busy guy on stage doing his thing. John really had to just find a way to glue this all together.
Yep.
And a lot of times, a bass player can get overwhelmed in that and just like be like the mom picking up the toys after the kid, where you're like, the kid's just like, just dropping stuff and you're just going behind him, picking up, throwing it back in the bag to keep the living room in some kind of order.
Right.
But that's not how John approached it. John just left the mess and somehow made the mess beautiful.
Yep.
And I don't know how else to describe that, but to have a bass player be the one that creates almost all the pocket, that all this wild drum stuff fits into, and all of Pete's creativity, and it still supports the vocals. I got nothing but nice things to say about John Entwistle as a player.
No, it's really true. And like in the on this tune, on the parts that are like rhythmically down a bit, I mean, the counterpoint that he's doing with the vocals is just, it's perfect. It doesn't move very much harmonically, but it's rhythmically exactly a perfect complement of what the vocals are doing. It follows the arc beautifully. Yeah, it's really impressive.
Yeah, I agree.
One of my favorite songs.
It's a good tune, and narrowly didn't make my list. And I think it was because I peeked at yours and saw that you had some of these other ones, and I'm like, well, Pinball Wizard isn't on your list, and I think it's got to be on one of them. So
I wanted to leave room for you.
Yeah. So my number 6 is Behind Blue Eyes, which is probably one of the few ballady type tunes that The Who did, and that's kind of why I put it on. And on an essential list, I felt like we needed to explore that they did do some kind of ballad work, and Behind Blue Eyes seemed as good of a ballad choice as any. And that's mostly why I picked it. It's pretty. It shows that this band has the ability to play something pretty, even with Keith Moon on drums.
Yeah.
And I think it's a beautiful tune.
Yep.
They execute it well. And just shows that there's some range there that you might not expect given a lot of the rest of their catalog.
Yeah, no, it's great. It was a staple forever. It was super huge when the album came out. It was one of the standouts right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't put it on, frankly, because it's one of those tunes that has become so ubiquitous. I just didn't pick it, but it's a great song, great vocal track. When it opens up into the energetic part. It's The Who again, rocking like they do, and it's different but really compelling and fun.
Yeah, and this is certainly after they've defined what The Who sound is. Even though this is a ballad and they're doing something different, I don't think you're going to mistake this track as any other band.
No.
This is clearly they've well established what their signature sound is, and this fits within those constraints. All right. Your number 6 is Love Ain't for Keepin'.
Yeah, same album as both tunes we've talked about so far. Once again, I think this is one of the Lifehouse cycle tunes.
Okay.
Because I've done a little bit of reading about that. One of the characters is a girl whose parents were farmers. But I think the farm was controlled by the government. So they were forced to not grow stuff or whatever, So this tune is really, it's primarily acoustic. Electric bass, drums, of course, but acoustic guitars, a few tracks of them, great playing. It's got a really cool feel to me. The vocals are just basically, like laying on my back on the grass, you bring the baby's sleeping, you bring me tea, loving for keeping, it's just kind of like husband and wife hanging out, is really what it's kind of about. And I love the playing is beautiful. The bass playing, once again, is fabulous on this tune. It just really fits everything. It fits in between the vocals and the guitar. It's Pete doing his acoustic guitar thing too, which is really good. I mean, he's a great acoustic guitar player.
Yeah, he is.
And and Keith is pretty restrained on this tune.
Yeah.
I
actually looked on this one to see if it was even Keith on the track. It is.
Yeah,
but it's a very on the leash.
What's the interesting thing about Keith too is Keith did on the albums the high vocals.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was the high singer and all the super high singer. Yeah, not live, but on the recordings. But I love this tune. I've always just loved the feel of it. It just feels like a nice afternoon, and it just feels relaxed, and I love it.
Yeah, when I was listening, it makes sense that it would be part of that rock opera process for me. Because when I listened to it, my impression was this feels dramatic. Mm-hmm. It feels like a calm before the storm kind of song, and like the next cut on the album, or was going to be the storm. It's almost setting you up for something. It's kind of my impression. And you're telling me that story makes sense. I bet that is how Pete envisioned it as he was writing it.
Yeah. Bassline is great. The bassline's got this really lopey character that is really, once again, afternoon in the country. Is what it sounds like. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's a cool tune, man.
Yep.
All right, that puts us at my number 5, which is "Who Are You," which I think is the maybe not maybe. This is the best rock intro of all time. The halftime. It's mind-blowingly good still today.
Yeah.
I've heard 1,000 times.
Always good.
I could listen to it forever. This is such a smart intro to a rock tune. And it's I'm almost crying thinking about how good this is. It's so powerful, and it's so smart, and it's so simple.
Yep.
And that's part of the genius of it, is that it's simple and innovative. I've never heard anything else like it up to this point, and not a lot that have tried after, because if you tried to take any influence, you'd almost have to copy it because it's so simple. But it's just genius. And then the tune's great too, but this is specifically on my list because of the intro. I just think it's super smart, and it's just super smart.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it's great. I'll support that completely. You know, I mean, and also I give kudos to The Who for working the name of the band into a song.
Yeah.
I mean, just because that's cool, you know. But yeah, it's great. It's a great song. You know, great vocal once again. All the components they have a way of, you know, I think one of the things about them is they're so busy, yet they leave room for everything. So it's busy, but not dense, let's put it that way, you know?
Yeah.
And something about that makes it light at the same time that it's super aggressive somehow.
Well, this is one where Keith Moon really digs into hi-hat, ironically, after, you know, notoriously kind of hating that component of a traditional drum kit.
Yeah.
He's just blasting away the 16th note, almost like a mambo, like a Latin jazz groove, but he's not playing jazz, you know, Latin at all, but just that,
Yep.
you know, and it's just driving the whole thing. It just has high energy through the whole tune. Yeah, this is really a great cut, and I don't know, maybe it should have been higher on my list if I was really ranking them. I just think that this has got all the little elements of genius from these four guys in it in one cut.
Yeah.
If I had to put the Who down to one tune, if we were making like the one song,
really?
I'm pretty sure that Who Are You would be my pick. This is the one.
Nice.
But moving on, your number 5.
Mine. Yeah, it's a tune called "Cut My Hair." It's from the album that was after Who's Next. It was called Quadrophenia. Another rock opera. You know, I think it was well received when it came out in 1973.
They did a whole video. Didn't they like a film?
They made a movie, and it wasn't. Actually, they did a good job with it, because it wasn't just a movie of the music. It was a movie of the story.
Right.
You know, so there was Who music into it, but it wasn't the main thing. It was the story. And it was an interesting story. Once again, you know, Pete writes about, you know, youths being alienated from society or trying to find their place to fit in, is what that album's pretty much about. Quadrophenia, I guess it refers to the character having not schizophrenic behavior, but quadrophenic behavior. So he has 4 personalities in himself, you know, which represent each of the 4 members of the band. There's themes for each one, you know, which is interesting. It's a double album, great album, one of my favorites. I still listen to it often. This tune is the second tune on the album. The first one is also on my list. We get to that in a minute, which is kind of like, well, we'll get to that in a minute. This one is about the home life of the main character.
Right.
It's about his day, his relationship with his parents, his relationship with his kids in the neighborhood, the kids at school, how he feels alienated. You know, and for me, this was 1973. I was in high school, so it made a lot of resonance with me.
Sure.
But once again, on this tune, great guitar playing, bass playing is once again almost lead bass playing during the verses, but understated, so beautiful, you know. It's the kind of thing that I would expect somebody like Joe Osborne with the...
I'm not sure.
The ones who did Rainy Days and Mondays. The singing duo, the Carpenters. The guy who played bass with the Carpenters.
Oh, okay.
Is similar to in terms of the melodic moves on the bass guitar, but not in the way of anything else. It's like they hold their own. They create a whole different space, you know, and they create a great flavor for the thing, you know.
Yeah, I was thinking more like John Paul Jones from Zeppelin for that
definitely.
melodic kind of, and he probably took it from Quadrophenia. Really,
could be, yeah.
I think there's another interesting pop culture reference, and I didn't Phil Collins kind of get discovered doing the Quadrophenia movie?
You know, I tell you what, yeah, maybe as a solo person, perhaps, yeah.
I think they brought him on so that because he was like an acting, singing drummer, and he was in the movie.
Yes.
And then after the movie, Genesis picked him up. Is how I think that worked.
He was with Genesis. Let me think about this. No, he was with Genesis always.
Okay.
But he became more the persona of Phil Collins in the media, I think, probably as a result of this, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because that would be 78, yeah, well, when 70, I think the movie was 70, I think it was 78 perhaps, maybe. But yeah, by that time, I think Peter Gabriel had left Genesis, so Phil
Yeah,
Collins.
should have done a little more homework on this one for me, because I don't know. I just remember that Phil was in the movie, and I remember there...
Yeah, Sting was in the movie too.
Oh, that I didn't know.
Yeah, Sting plays a character called Ace Face, and he was the guy. There's one of the tunes where they're in a nightclub. The main character goes down to Brighton, which is like a holiday coastal town in England, and there's a nightclub where all the kids are in there, and this guy is like one of those guys who is dressed to the nines and looks perfect, and then whatever dance he does, everybody copies him, so it becomes a thing. He's like the leader, so to speak. Yeah.
Cool.
And he's riding the best scooter with the shiniest mirrors and everything, man. He's like, he's probably the rich kid who's slumming with the regular kids. But yeah, so that's who Sting is in this movie. But yeah, it's an interesting movie. I think it's a great album. Cut My Hair was one of my favorites. Just the mood, and yeah, I just love it.
Nice. It's cool, man. My number 4 is Pinball Wizard. And this one might suffer a little bit, like for the finalists, because I think this got played to death on radio.
Sure, but
I think that this is the one that was my first awareness of like hearing it on the radio and going, oh, this is the Who, and like knowing. And even as a younger guy, before I was really into music, I just remember hearing this tune, and it was a pinball machine. I knew what a pinball machine was when I was like 5 years old, so it was a tune that I, on the surface level, could relate to. And that's kind of why I made the list. Yeah. I was a little surprised that it wasn't on yours. Maybe you were just hoping that I'd put it on, but...
No, the thing for me with Tommy is I listened to Tommy when it came out. I was way into it, But for me, that album doesn't... I kind of moved past it. I think what I don't like about Tommy is I don't like the sound of it. Okay. Because it's understated. It's muted. It sounds muted to me.
So it's a production quality
yes,
thing.
The production sounds like it's too clean for me. It's just, but there's great songs on it, like that one's great. On some stuff later that they do an instrumental with sections from it, that I just love to death, So there's great stuff on it, but for me, it hadn't stood up as well as the other ones.
Yeah, on this one, I think I like the mix as a drummer, because I just feel like that there's like this rolling thunder. There's not really a drum groove on the whole thing. I mean, Keith's just kind of just playing toms. He's just playing in time and playing around, and it's interesting for that.
Yeah, and I will say, I know what you're talking about in this one, because of all the tunes on Tommy, the standout for me was Pinball Wizard. That's the one that is the most compelling,
Sure.
for me, the whole album. It's also got the Pete Townsend, of course, this, suspension resolve thing, which was super smart,
Yeah.
But he does that all the time. It's one of his things, which is beautiful. It's such a beautiful thing. Suspensions are great. He also does a thing on a number of tunes. I can't remember where they are now, but he does like all the thing where it's for chord people, but like, a major 9, no third kind of a chord, So it's got like the 9 feeling, but no third on it. So it's ambiguous at the same time as being a major chord,
I wonder if he used to like float it to like do transitions between like major minor stuff because it became ambiguous.
Well,
that's what a suspension really is.
Some of their tunes are often that way, where they are in whatever key it is, but there's gray areas. Let's put it that way. You know? It's kind of like how Steely Dan puts the 9 in the bottom. So it's a 2 really, but it's a 9. To create that mood. So it's one of those devices that really is. He used it as one of his identities. It's great.
Yeah, it's really smart stuff.
Yep.
All right. Your number 4 then is The Real Me.
Yes. Same album, Quadrophenia. It's the one that directly precedes Cut My Hair on the album.
Okay.
So the way the album starts out, there is thunder and rain, and there's like the 4 themes kind of bleed through a little bit, and then it goes into The Real Me. So that's the first tune on the album. And I this is one of my favorites of all time because it just kind of comes out of nowhere. There's this like nebulous introduction, and then Roger sings, "Can you see the real me? Can you? Can you?" And then this tune just kicks. Yeah. And like straight from the gate, it's like the drums are going nuts when the toms and John Entwistle is playing bass line first. on the album, and it's like a solo bass line.
Yep.
And then it's just all in C minor, and it's just tight as you want, and it's beautiful. Horn section on the choruses, and it just builds emotionally more and more and more and more. It's great.
It also, like, lyrically, I think has that angst, that teen angst that I think Sting with the Police got a lot of mileage out of this idea. And maybe this was just British culture, especially of, your teens turning into your 20s was just this, undefined time. We're a different generation. Our parents don't understand. And how are we supposed to be? There's no blueprint for us. And the way I actually am, nobody seems to want to accept.
Yep.
And I think that even back, when these guys started it, I think the Police got a lot of mileage out of the same kind of theming, Message in a Bottle, and Invisible Sun, lots of this kind of message. And I think it's a really powerful message.
It's great. And you know what? You mentioned that it's true. Like I said, this was 73. I was in high school. I was a senior, And so for me, this was like right where I was.
Sure.
Because I don't know if it was just English, but it was the kind of the times, it was an interesting time because 1973 I was a senior in high school and they stopped at the draft like right before they would have pulled my number up. So it was a weird time. There was stuff going on that was pretty serious.
Well, and then, the summer of 69, you're an 8th grader, so you're still a child essentially, but you're old enough to like kind of be hip to what's going on. And
yeah, it's very true. Yeah, my generation was funny because we were like the generation behind, just behind the hippies and the 60s people. So we watched it, but it wasn't ours, so it was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
And this was ours, so.
Yeah, it's a cool time. Sometimes I feel like I'm 20 years too young for where my interests are. I just think the 60s would have been so cool for me. I think I would have fit in really well as a player and just as an individual with 60s culture. I think that would have been really hip for me. And 90s culture just I didn't have a lot of affinity for 90s culture the age I wish I was.
The 90s were an odd decade.
Yeah, it was, man. It's just a weird time to grow up, I mean, born in 78, my early childhood in the 80s, and I remember all the 80s stuff still, but, really becoming an adult in the 90s it was weird, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, number 3 for me is We Won't Get Fooled Again. Won't Get Fooled Again. And again, this is mostly a Keith Moon drumming track. This is another one where he's just doing something I've never heard before. It's like nobody else can. I've never heard another good recording of somebody trying to sound like this. And Keith sounds great.
Yeah.
But does Keith sound great because of John? I don't know. I think if somebody laid down a track like that, like first and said, okay, guys, layer on top of that. I'm going to lay down the drums and you guys build the song on top.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone else can figure out what to do.
Yeah.
To something like this. But that's part of the reason I think it's genius.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great song. I love this song. It's interesting too. There's that keyboard figure, right?
Right.
Which is, I think I'm right in this. I think there's a misconception that it's sequenced, because it's not. Believe it or not.
Pete's doing that live, huh?
Yeah, because what it is, he had like a VC. I think he called it a VCS3 organ, and I believe it was kind of a thing where it had a percussive feature, where you would hold a chord down and it would go. It would do like a steady, repeating kind of a thing.
TB01 organ.
Okay, yeah, whatever that was. But so basically, those chords you're hearing, he's playing those chords and just moving the fingers where they're supposed to. He's not doing the steady rhythmic thing that's happening automatically.
Okay.
He's just moving the chords where they're supposed to go, and it's arpeggiating through them. So I think he laid that down first, and then they did the song on top of that. Is how that worked.
Okay.
I know they toured for a while. On this tour, I saw them do this tour. Then they used some tapes of those keyboard parts.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I just I forgot that we got 20 years between us, but you saw the Who live.
Oh yeah.
Like that's wild, man.
It was pretty big.
Yeah, I bet. So where'd you tell me when you saw him?
Well, it would have been 1972.
Okay.
73 maybe. I don't know. Right post.
So
actually,
high school.
It might even have been just as, high school, sophomore, junior in San Francisco at the Civic Auditorium, this is also back in the day before they really figured tours out or figured out rock and roll how to do it, for the most money. The PA was super small. You remember, there was these, I think they were Shure, just little, they were like cabinets that were about 6 feet tall. They had like 10s in them or something, that they had a bunch of those on the sides. And then Pete's wall of guitar amps and John's wall of bass amps. And they just came out and pounded,
Wow.
John was playing a Gibson Thunderbird bass, through this sun wall of 40 speakers or whatever it was, It sounded like a jet taking off. It was amazing, Pete was killer.
Yeah.
At the end of the show, his guitar was flying 40 feet in the air, and all the stuff.
Yeah, they were wild, man.
They were the most exciting. They were the most fun, too. They were the most, of all the bands I saw, they were fun all the way through,
Yeah, this is another one reason that, I lament being as young as I am, because, man, I would love to see the Who live.
Well, I saw them a few times. I saw them then, and then I didn't see them again till after Keith died.
Right.
And I saw
that
him.
was 74, I think?
78, I believe.
Oh, 70, right, it was 78, right.
Actually a sad trivial fact on the album with Who Are You on it, Who Are You?
Yeah.
On the cover, he's sitting in a chair. They're on the back of like a bunch of their stage gears where they're standing. There's cables everywhere and boxes and stuff. He's sitting in a chair in like a dressage uniform, with the hat and the jodhpurs and stuff, like he would, But right above him says "Not to be taken away." There's a thing painted on the speaker right above him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and after the fact, you go like, "Oh my gosh," which is just one of those things, right?
Right.
Yeah. No, but I saw them with Kenny Jones in the 80s, which was underwhelming. It was kind of like the Who, but more like a Pete Townsend solo show.
Right.
Yeah. But then the happy part is in the late 90s, they toured Quadrophenia again, but they got Ringo's son, Zach Starkey, to play drums. And he wasn't as wild as Keith, but it was the same thing. It was like the Who are back. It was amazing. It sounded
cool.
His energy was Who energy. It was really good. Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah, that would have been really cool to see too. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, it's such a good band. Anyway, I have a lot more to add. All right, so number 3, this is where you have Magic Bus. This is my number 10, but let's talk about it in more depth now. Magic Bus.
Now, you I'm guessing you chose a studio version?
I did choose a studio version. You specifically picked the live at Leeds, right?
I don't particularly like the studio version very much. It's okay. To me, that's kind of like in the earlier part of the career when the songs were all kind of weird and spotty. They weren't really. It was a sound collage, which is interesting. A lot of interesting stuff going on. But I like the Live at Leeds version because it's just so raw rock and roll.
Yeah.
It just is some fabulous bass playing.
Yeah, the studio version's got a lot of like little claves and drum, little percussive things.
Yeah,
happening.
the Live at Leeds version has claves. The whole first part is just him playing claves. But the cool thing about it, this is the hip thing about this tune, is the bass playing is phenomenal on this one.
Yeah.
Because he's playing the pick with the P bass, right? And so once it starts off with Pete playing guitar with the clave, and it's kind of a really cool finger picking, kind of like country-ish almost kind of a thing, but funky at the same time. Really cool. And then the bass comes in and starts doing like a Bo Diddley thing. But of course, Keith is going tick, 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 whatever he's doing on the clave. So it's all about bass guitar. And he's using the tone is this, it's a P bass with the treble all the way on with a pick through like a stack of Marshalls. So it's like so aggressive.
Yeah.
This tone is so bright and so aggressive with a lot of bottom end too. It's, for me being, a 13-year-old, it was like, this is it, man. This is the thing. So, but, and then it goes through the whole verse goes to the middle part where it's all instrumental, and it comes back down again to a low part where it's just nothing but just the bass guitar. And the two vocals are doing this dialogue, And it's cool. It's just really, really cool. I've heard critics say that it's the worst thing ever recorded. I beg to differ.
I think it's fine.
To me, it's pretty exciting. Yeah, so that's why I like the Live at Leeds version.
I think that whole record, I don't know that I'd ever put ears on it. I might have accidentally heard it if somebody played it live on the radio, but I don't think I've ever purposely listened to that live record before. And I almost got through all of it because I saw three of your picks were specifically off of that, and so I tried to make a point of listening to it.
Yeah,
and
cool.
I think it's a fantastic concert. I wish I had been there.
You know what? And to me, it's the best live album I know of. And frankly, when you hear this album, this is. I mean, this when I saw the Who, it was like that. I mean, you can imagine it was Who's Next Tunes, but with that, it was with that energy and that attitude and that Take No Prisoners. It's look out, here comes the Who.
Yeah, man.
It was.
All right. So number 2, we have a true crossover. Both of us at number 2.
Okay.
Put My Generation.
All right.
Same place, same thing. Neither one of us think it's the absolute top of the list, but we both think it's the second. And
yep.
I think it has everything to do with a little bit of what we talked about before of this youth, their generation, kind of having no template. That we were in a big social change in the 60s. And these guys started the band young, and there was just a lot of guessing. Who are we? What are we doing? And you were alive at that time too, so you have a much more insight as to what that was really about than me just speculating.
Now the My Generation version, I'm guessing was the studio version you were talking about.
I picked the studio version.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because that was, I think, similarly in the same area as I Can See from Miles, where they just were kind of, that was one of the ones that was staking their claim, so to speak.
Sure.
And it was cool. It had the bass solo on it, which is awesome. For a pop tune back then, there were no bass solos. So that was an awesome thing. The version that I like on Live at Leeds, once again, is that same performance evening. It's, I think, 15 minutes long.
Yeah, it's long cut.
Yeah, so it starts off with My Generation, and it's got the bass solo. Once again, he tears it up. It's great playing with the pick again, so it's got that really aggressive tone. But then they go into a whole bunch of selections from Tommy, so it's kind of like a medley of Tommy themes. I think my favorite part of that is when there's a part on Tommy, a piece called The Underture, or Sparks, I believe, where it's got, basically the bass line is boom, 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 boom. And they do this whole thing where it's like boom, 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 boom. It's a whole instrumental thing, which is like a theme that they go through. But on this recording, it's really aggressive.
Right.
It's really cool. As a matter of fact, on this part, albums of this time, especially this one, you kind of could hear where heavier bands that came later, where they went like,
this is the seed of an idea.
Yeah, because there's a part in that.
Rush, I think, especially.
Yeah, there's a part in this Sparks Underture thing where it builds up and builds up with these two chords going like, It's just building. It just comes down to one big note where Pete just lays this chord and it's huge, and the bass is just doing this octave thing. It's just like they're saying, listen to this, bitches. This is kind of like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's powerful. They really understood how to do the big arena thing.
Yep.
Like before everyone else kind of figured out how do you keep people in the nosebleed seats as engaged? And I think the Who might have been the first band to really be able to play to these really, Queen, I think, was like the next iteration of really understanding how to get these huge venues and everyone focused on, you can barely see them, you know. But the Who, I think, were the first template to really get that kind of giant crowd control and interaction.
They were great at it, and whether or not it was by design or not, I don't know, but the way that Pete wrote those tunes, they sound great in an arena. They sound big in an environment like that. You can still hear all the parts. It's not, because some bands you go see in a big room and it's all kind of washed out. So they not only had the idea about how to do it, like you're mentioning, with as far as allowing the audience to, giving them permission to have as much fun as they could with it. The songs just were built to be played that way. Just big and open and expansive. You know, it was great. It was great.
Yeah, the Who could never have played a smaller club venue. You never could have heard the Who at Yoshi's.
Can you imagine?
I mean, it wouldn't have been, you just couldn't have done it.
You know, there's another one who's done it later years. Is it was the most successful to my mind in terms of playing arenas. Is U2 was great.
Yeah.
Their songs sound great in an arena because they're simple. It's usually just through two parts, you know, with a compelling vocal at the top. But once again, it's kind of similar in a way in that it just sounds done in a big environment, you know.
The other thing, I saw U2 once live in Oakland, and whoever their stage designer was, really, they have it wasn't. They would usually play basketball arenas so that they could seat people behind.
Yeah.
But then the stage didn't turn or anything, but it was laid out in a way that having, you know, the behind Larry seat, which is what I had,
nice,
was still very compelling because Bono would still turn around and sing to you. The stage was set up to be kind of a 360-degree experience.
Yeah.
And then mostly a 90-degree experience because most of the fans were sort of along the sidelines of the court. So you kind of get the bad seats where you were getting the front shot, but you were way far away, or the behind shot where you were close, but you got to, you know, and to me that was great. Well, actually getting to see Larry from behind him and see everything he was doing was great.
I bet.
But you don't have to rabbit trail too far on that. But there certainly is an iteration of the bands that understood how to play these giant venues effectively.
Yeah.
And I think the Who are maybe the most prototype, and then Queen, I think, and then U2, and then Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
I think really, like, you know, kind of getting out of the rock thing, but
Garth,
that dude knew what he was doing.
That's very true. Yeah. You cannot take that away. It's true. Yeah. Yep.
All right. My generation done. So my number one is Baba O'Reilly. Which I think the synth work here is what it is. And I picked this because I think that this is probably the most associated song in my experience back to the Who.
Yep.
And it's, you know, I don't know how to say it. Like, it's the same kind of things. This is in the signature sound. It doesn't really have anything that we haven't talked about, but it all kind of comes together. I still think Who Are You is probably, for me personally, the more iconic tune, but I think in a broader sense, this is the tune that most people would associate with the Who.
Probably so. This was, this is, you're right, this is probably the definitive Who hit. Everybody will know this one. I mean, and if you think about how it's composed, it's primary colors, man. They're right there, but they're done with a lot of heart, man. It's just, you know, simple as can be, and yet compelling at the same time. You know, the vocal's great singer.
Yeah.
To pull, you know, if you think about Roger Daltrey too, he had to sing over a lot of sound.
Yeah.
And live, he never was law. He did it, man. It was pretty impressive, you know. Great phrasing too. A lot of times with Roger's vocals, he did different things in different tunes where he would, you know, kind of pull back and like legato some stuff, and it was always interesting. Yeah, I think he might not get as much props as he should.
Yeah, I certainly felt like I haven't given him as much as he does deserve, because he's kind of, you know, almost every band, when you talk about a band instead of just a solo artist, there's always someone who gets overshadowed. I think Alex Lifeson kind of gets overshadowed in Rush, and I think that the guitar player, who I can't even think of his name off the top of my head, in Police.
Andy Summers,
Yeah, Andy Summers. Kind of gets overshadowed by the other two, and I think in the Who, it's Roger that kind of gets overshadowed by the other three. I think that's just there's always like the fourth guy. I think John Paul Jones in Zeppelin, you know, and for me that's kind of wild because I think John Paul Jones is absolutely brilliant. But when the contemporaries are Page and Bonham and Plant, Plant, it's. Somebody's kind of got to be that fourth guy.
John Paul Jones is a serious player. Man,
yeah, for sure.
He's really a player.
So anyway, you're right. I think Roger hasn't gotten the respect he does deserve from me today, but I don't mean to be disrespectful because he's the Who's a fantastic band.
Yep.
But that's it. I think it's just, this is like sort of the signature one. Who Were You is probably more personal for me, but I think that in a broader stroke, this is sort of the signature one. And then your number one was my number 8. Mm-hmm. So we got the crossover, Love Reign Over Me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this one. I put this as number one. I just think it's a perfect song, you know.
That's a fair thing. This is a well-done composition.
It's just, and also this is the last song on Quadrophenia. This is the wrap-up of the whole thing. And so the main character at this point, he's basically exhausted all of his possibilities. You know, he's lost all his friends. He lost his girlfriend, lost his job, wrecked his bike, wrecked his motorcycle. He goes to the beach and gets in a boat and rows out to an island, you know, off the beach, and just lays there and wants to die. It's kind of where it's about, you know. And then he gets a moment of enlightenment where he realizes that there's hope. It's what this song is really about, you know. So it's really, and that feeling really it fits the whole mood of the song, you know, because it starts off with the kind of rain is kind of sounding, you know. And Pete, actually, I know he wrote this, he was influenced by a couple people. Meher Baba was his spiritual kind of person, you know, guy that he was trying to emulate. But there was another writer that had a whole thing that he incorporated into this about just the rain, you know, the rain. In the lyrics, actually, they use the word rain, R-A-I-N, during the verses, but it's R-E-I-G-N during the choruses, you know.
Oh.
Yeah. So the rain, the allegory is the rain is like a blessing from God, you know, and then the thunder is the voice of God is one of the themes that he played with, I guess, in this one. But that's, you know, for me, it wasn't like that when I heard the song. You know,
sure.
To me, I just love it. It's interesting because it's got the whole suspension thing going over in a minor key going on, you know. Chords are interesting, E flat minor to B to A flat, you know. And that's an interesting move, you know. It's like it creates so much space. There's elements that are compositionally so beautiful for me, like when it goes to the chorus, when it goes to the Love Reign Over Me. Mm-hmm. Kind of what do you call the rhythm? Don't you get it? It's almost like a bolero kind of rhythm or something, you know? Yeah. But the cool thing is it's got that really, the chords are great, bass line is cool, just supporting it. This one's really just kind of like hanging down on this one, no forward bass, it's really just strong. He's actually playing chords, I think, at the beginning. He's playing on the bass.
On the bass, yeah, I think so too.
It's real thick down there, but not, you know, terrible. But in the chorus, I love that he put that guitar line, just doing the descending guitar line. It's just doing the scale, you know. It's when it goes to the chorus and the vocal start and the guitar just goes like dang, dang, dang. It's just
chromatic. It's just chromatic extension, right?
It's skill. It's just
a scale. Okay.
Yeah, it's just, but all the way down for all of the chords to the very bottom. And, you know, it's just, once again, a real visual kind of a thing, you know. That could be what the rain coming down. That could be the salvation coming down. It could be just a good sound. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a great song, you know. Vocals killer. The second verse, like I was talking about, Roger kind of does some different phrasing where he holds back on the back of the beat, which is really cool, you know, and it's an interesting tune.
Yeah, and I think that that we haven't given Pete as much props as he deserves either, because I think that Pete's more than a songwriter. I think Pete's a composer.
Yeah.
And to be an arena rock and roll band composer is kind of unique.
Yep.
And his solo career continues that trend of him being wildly imaginative and using tools that I think like a John Williams or a Stevie Wonder. These guys who understand all of the instrumentation and can, through whether it's written music or language, they have the communication skills to get the other players to execute their vision in such a way. And I think that Pete Townshend is just a fantastic composer.
He really is. Maybe
even better a composer than a songwriter.
Could be, yeah. You know, and it's interesting because I mean, Pete has gotten a lot of accolades over the years, obviously, you know. I am going to throw him a bone in that, you know, I think he never really makes the list of being top guitar players, but I find that to be
insulting.
Not correct. Yeah, because even though he's not Eric Clapton, you know, fine, but just to be able to make his guitar have that much power and that much emotion, and have those chords be so compelling. It's like, this is a big deal. You to me, he's kind of understated in the same way that Keith Richards is understated.
Yep.
Because Keith is like the deal with that group, but he just is the guy too at the same time. It's easy to overlook it, but it's kind of the essential component of the whole thing.
Well, and Keith's just got mastered his own personal signature sound so early in his career.
Yep.
He just takes a string off, right?
He plays 5-string a lot, yeah.
Yeah, he plays his 5 strings. And I think that's just, part of his deal.
Yeah, it works for him. It made sense.
All right, cool, man. We're going to take a quick break, have a little wrestling match off the air, decide how we're going to actually make a combined essential list, and then we'll come back and let you know what it is.
I'd like to throw one more thing, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
One more tip to everybody. There's something that if people haven't seen this and you're interested in who the Who was, and you want to see what they were about, this is on YouTube. It's a performance of Won't Get Fooled Again, done in 1978. They did it at a sound studio. It's just called Won't Get Fooled Again. It's Shepperton Studios, 1978. It's fabulous. It's what the Who is all about, and you'll see what the deal was. So
cool, man. Thanks for sharing.
I think it was the last thing that Keith did before he died.
Yeah, I think. August of 78.
Yeah, so that's an honorable mention, I guess. I'll call that one.
Yeah. August 10th, as I recall. I wasn't around yet. I missed it by 12 days. All right. We're going to take a break and rank these suckers. All right, and we're back. And with a little negotiation, we narrowed it down to what we think is the final 10. Number 1, so when we get this list, because it's just the order of the actual playlist, so we'll start with number 1. By virtue of being number 2 on both of our lists, we made number 1, My Generation. And then specifically the Live at Leeds version.
Oh, yes, that's the one.
Yeah. And then 2, Love Reign Over Me was your number 1. It was my number 8.
Yeah.
Another crossover, great cut. Number 3, I think that my impassioned statements about Who Are You and that intro, just the whole cut, I just think that's a fantastic cut. So I got that one in at number 3.
Yep.
Number 4 is The Real Me, which was your number 4 overall. Number 5, Bargain. And I think if I have, sometimes you get a little buyer's remorse, a little bit of remorse when you make these lists. And I think Bargain was a miss for me. I think that I probably should have had that. We should have had 5 crossovers, but I'm glad we didn't.
Yeah, it's a great song.
It's a great tune.
Yeah.
Number 6, Behind Blue Eyes.
Yeah.
I think it's important to have not their only ballad, but probably their most popular ballad.
Yeah.
And put it in the listening order of the playlist that kind of makes sense. I don't want it to be too early or too late, so we kind of put Behind Blue Eyes right in the middle, to kind of as a palate cleanser between all the other things I got going on.
Well, it was a big tune. And when that album came out, that one was on the radio all the time. It was there was one of the 3 tunes off the album. That was one of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. And then number 7, I Can See for Miles was another crossover. We both had it a little bit lower. You had it at 8 and I had it at 7. So this is where it ends up on the final list. Number 8, Won't Get Fooled Again, which was my number 3 on my original list. Number 9, Magic Bus, again, specifically the Live at Leeds version. And at number 10, Pinball Wizard. Pinball Wizard, I think, does a lot of the same things as like Won't Get Fooled Again or Who Are You. It does the same thing, but it's interesting because it's the one from that particular album that I think is the standout.
Most definitely. Yeah, that was the one that kind of like, it drew the most attention. I think that tune sold the album, I think, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that, if you've never had ears on The Who, you're a younger listener, I think these are the 10 tunes that are going to make you listen to another 10, guys. This is a great band. And I hope we're leading you down a path to become Who fans after you can't see them anymore. They're kind of done.
Yeah, but you know what? It's great. Definitely worth the investment.
Yeah, investment of time for sure. So tell me more about what Zero Gravity's got coming up.
We
next
have
couple weeks.
Yeah, a couple of weeks. Actually, in September is what we have going. We have a couple of things. On the 6th, we're going to be at the Lube Room.
Okay, that's over in Dorrington?
Yep. And then on the 14th, I'm really not sure if this is a private event or not, but it's going to be over at, I believe, at the Murphy's Hotel.
Okay.
Four Winds Winery event. I think it's one of those things. Saturday afternoon, early evening.
Might be a wine club members only thing though.
Could be, but you know what? Those open up. I know after a while too. And
Yeah.
there is the bar there too, which is fun. So
Cool deal.
Yeah.
So those are the September dates coming up for you guys.
Yep, that's it.
Cool, man. So we just need to get Lauren on, and we'll have the whole of Zero Gravity having appeared on the show.
Yeah.
And cool, man. Well, thanks, Dan, for coming and putting that out. A really great episode, and look for Zero Gravity out in the wild, guys.
Come
Check
see
them
us.
out.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.